You know, when I was a kid and I dressed as Captain America, I had this really, poor quality polyurethane mask that I wore for the costume, and the eyes on it were just so far apart. And the thing itself was so tight it felt like it was cutting into my tear ducts. I eventually took the mask to a local dry cleaner to see if they could widen the eye holes. And while that worked for a time, eventually I just said "F it" and invested in a better quality silicone mask. Now the reason I'm bringing this up is because watching this movie and seeing how far apart the eyes are on Captain America's costume, it made me think the exact same thing. Just get a different mask, for God's sake. Like seriously, the eyes being too far apart bothered me more than the rubber ears did. Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. This week, in preparation of the upcoming Captain America Brave New World, we'll be covering what I suspect will actually be a better movie, Captain America from 1990. I mean, obviously at time of recording, the new Captain America movie isn't out yet, but come on. Also, side note, if any of you were curious about why they're releasing the new Captain America movie in February, it's a strategic release because the new Captain America is black. They did the exact same thing when Black Panther came out in 2018. That movie was released in February. And they also did the same thing with Captain Marvel in 2019. That movie was released March 8th, 2019, which is International Women's Day. It's all strategic marketing. Anyway, moving on. I am very clearly an enormous fan of Captain America. I don't know what it is, but I've been just obsessed with that character and his sort of man out of time story since I was a kid. I remember watching the Spider-Man cartoon in the 90s and just getting so excited whenever they covered Electro's backstory as the son of the Red Skull, or the Secret Wars arc where Spider-Man has to recruit heroes from across the universe. Captain America was just always my favorite character to see. And when I heard that they were making a live-action Captain America movie in 2011, I got so excited, and I quickly fell in love with the film. It became probably my favorite Marvel movie in Phase 1. If he wasn't already, Captain America became firmly established as one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Marvel superhero. When the movie went to Netflix, I probably binged it half a dozen times, because I just couldn't get enough of Captain America. And, to this day, I maintain that the sequel, Captain America the Winter Soldier, is without a doubt the best film in the MCU. That being said, as much as I love the Winter Soldier, I will always have a soft spot for the first Avenger just because of how I felt at the time. And it's actually funny because the movie was actually released about a month after my 13th birthday, and even before the movie came out, as a birthday present, I asked for a replica jacket for the first Avenger. And the damn thing still fits, if you could believe it. However, getting this jacket was not the only thing I did in preparation of the first Avenger coming out. I was so excited to see Captain America's origin on the big screen that prior to the film coming out, my stupid tween brain just assumed that I could probably find a leaked copy of the film online. This was pretty much right after the first trailer for Captain America the First Avenger came out, so as a stupid preteen, I just started googling around looking for different links. And eventually I found a link saying, ooh, new Captain America movie available online now. I clicked on it, and it turned out to be Captain America 1990. That was initially how I actually discovered this film, and while it wasn't exactly what I was looking for at the time, I wasn't exactly disappointed with it. Especially since up until that point it might have been the best Captain America movie. For those of you who don't know, there's actually been a few different adaptations of Captain America prior to the MCU. There was a film serial for Captain America that came out in the 40s, which I think was around the same time as Spy Smasher. And there was also two separate TV movies for Captain America that came out in 1979. And I vaguely remember watching one of them. And, it's not great. Not great. But Captain America 1990, there's something special about it, and I didn't remember much of it until my rewatch. But going back into this film nearly 15 years later, I gotta say, I was actually kind of impressed with a lot of the things that this film did. So what happens in Captain America 1990? Well, the film starts in 1936 in Italy. We see a bunch of fascists breaking into the home of an Italian family, and they kidnap a boy who they say is of superior intelligence. The whole sequence itself actually feels very similar to like the opening scene of the first X-Men movie, where Magneto as a child is being dragged away by Nazis during the Holocaust. But moving on from that point, the child is then taken to some sort of secret Nazi encampment called Fortress Lorenzo. There, they've been working with an experimental super soldier serum that they've been testing on animals. We actually see the effect of the serum on a rat in the film, a stop-motion rat. And despite the fact that the rat looks like a walking red skeleton, the Nazis say, this serum's ready for human trials. So they bring the boy in, begin the experiment. One of the scientists, a woman named Dr. Maria Vaselli, objects to the whole thing, but she's deemed a traitor, so she runs away. She can then hear the boy screaming from outside the fortress. We pivot 7 years later to the United States, and that's where we hear discussions from the American government about creating their own super soldiers. And the first test subject that they've selected is Steve Rogers, Captain America. We pivot to Steve as he's having a going away party with his family. And I'll give the movie kudos, because despite only costing like $3 million, very low budget, the movie does make a sincere effort trying to get the audience to believe that this is in fact the 1940s. With the way characters are dressed and with certain cars that you see around the street. Like, there's an attempt made to get you to believe that this is in a different time period. In any case, Steve makes his heartfelt goodbyes to his community, he says goodbye to his mother, he says goodbye to his girlfriend, and then he goes off to engage in the experiment. At this point, we get the standard Captain America origin story that we all know. Sickly young boy goes into military experiment, becomes stronger, curing his illness. In this case, polio. Captain America has polio in this version. The experiment is a success. The doctor who did the experiment, in this case Dr. Vaselli, gets shot by an undercover Nazi. Captain America ends up being the only super soldier who can ever exist. He goes in for a mission to prevent an attack on America, fights the Red Skull, ends up attached to a rocket that's being shot at the United States, manages to divert the rocket's trajectory, but unfortunately winds up in a scenario where he gets frozen for decades. Like, we all know the origin story of Captain America, but something that really impressed me with this film is that unlike the first Avenger, which, to be clear, is a movie that I love, Captain America 1990 only spends about 20 minutes in the 1940s. Like, they basically cover the entire origin story in the first act of the film, and then in acts 2 and 3, we spend the bulk of our time in, like, the late 80s, early 90s. So I actually do find the structure of this film very impressive. The fact that they don't just drag their feet the entire time, sticking in one era. They establish everything right away and then jump to a point where audiences would be more comfortable, which I think is actually pretty good storytelling. Of course, before we jump to the future, we actually get introduced to one of the film's central characters, Thomas Kimball. We're actually introduced to Thomas as a child in Washington, D.C. And Thomas is actually there to see Captain America in action as he's diverting a missile away from the White House. Thomas then snaps a picture of the event and he shows it to his best friend Sam. The two kids then kind of like geek out over how cool this is and how basically Thomas saw a superhero in action. And Sam tries to figure out, who could this superhero be? And Sam throws out a couple guesses saying that, maybe it was the Submariner or the Human Torch. Which, when I heard that, I thought, that is an amazing reference. Because for those of you who don't know, the first two characters that were ever introduced in Marvel Comics were Namor the Submariner and the android Human Torch. And the implication of this that I simply love is the idea that these kids, their only frame of reference is comics. So they're trying to figure out who this real-world superhero is based on comics that they've read. It really invests you in this sense of like childlike wonderment and imagination. The kid Sam even has like a little decoder that he carries around with him, which is great. Anyway though, the film pivots decades later, and we get this neat little montage where it's like, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and each decade is associated with a specific newspaper headline covering a significant event in 20th century political history. But as we read through each headline, we also get a smaller article section on the growing political career of young Thomas Kimball, until we eventually get to the 1990s, where Thomas has actually become president. It's an interesting trajectory that you see, because we're initially introduced to this kid who said, I'll be president someday, and then he actually does become president. It's inspiring. Of course, this achievement is undermined by the reality that as president, you are unavoidably a political target by threats both abroad and at home. When we first see the Oval Office, we're reintroduced to the character of General Fleming, who we actually saw earlier in the film during the 1940s scenes with Captain America. And General Fleming is arguing with President Kimball over his environmental policies because it will cause management issues within the military. Of course, Kimball is less concerned with that and more concerned with cleaning up the environment, which of course was like a big political issue in the late 80s, early 90s. It's like, oh, we need to get a green planet. Of course, Fleming is not having any of this, and at this point he reports back to his cartel, which is a group of shadowy elites that have slowly been guiding the course of politics for the last 50 years. And as we're told in this film, they are secretly behind so many national tragedies, such as the deaths of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. This is actually a very interesting reveal, and is also really reminiscent of the Hydra reveal in Captain America the Winter Soldier, when we find out that the Winter Soldier, as a stooge for Hydra, has also been molding the path of history. Of course, in this film, we get to see that this cartel is actually being run by the Red Skull, who has survived the war and actually gotten plastic surgery to alter his appearance. And I gotta say that I actually kind of like the makeup for him, because in the film we're told that he got extensive plastic surgery, but the way it looks like he just got pigment filler in his face. Like, we see the design of Red Skull early in the film, and comparing that design to the design that we see later, he looks pretty much exactly the same. The only difference is that his skin color is normal and he has hair. So I really like the idea that in universe, the plastic surgeons just said, we did our best here, we tried, we're sorry. But anyway, the cartel is talking about how President Kimball is going to cause problems for them in the long term. They debate the merits of killing him, but then they ultimately settle on, oh, we'll kidnap him and we'll put a chip in his brain to make him compliant to us. Of course, at about this point, this is when we're reintroduced to Captain America. Some researchers in Alaska find him in the ice, and they lift him out and try to figure out, oh, who could this be? What is this? And as he's getting thawed out, Captain America just breaks out of the ice and runs away. Of course, before he's completely out of sight, one of the researchers actually snaps a photo of him, and that photo lands in the paper. The photo is seen by President Kimball, and Kimball says, oh my god, it's the guy I saw as a kid. And then he calls his friend Sam, and says, Sam, it's this, blah, 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 blah. And then Sam says, oh my god, this guy could help us with the cartel, the cartel that's been ruining everything for 50 years. So Sam says he'll go find Captain America. And a little detail I like in this scene is that we see that Sam, as an adult, still has his decoder, and the decoder is actually faded, showing the passage of time, which is a nice little detail that they didn't have to do, but I'm glad that they did. Attention to detail. Of course, the president isn't the only person to see this newspaper headline of a man being found in ice. The Red Skull actually sees this headline as well, and realizes, oh no, Captain America, he's come back, he's going to f up all my shit. So the Red Skull tells his daughter, listen, girl, I need you to go and I need you to kill Captain America. And she's like, yes, Dad, I will do that. We then pivot back to Captain America, still in costume, as he's running through the northern Canadian forest. And normally I would think it was outlandish for someone to just run from Alaska to Canada, but this is like Captain America. He just survived 60 years being frozen, and he's a super soldier. So I don't really find it outside the realm of possibility that he could run from Alaska to northern Canada, especially since they're right next to each other. But in any case, Captain America, as he's running, is getting cornered. And since he just woke up, he has no idea what's going on. He sees that a couple people on motorcycles are coming towards him, and he's doing his best to defend himself. One of them happens to be the Red Skull's daughter, and she's trying to obviously kill Captain America. But then Sam shows up in a van and picks up Captain America to take him to safety. Sam then explains the situation. Captain America pretends that he's getting sick, and he takes the opportunity to steal Sam's van. Captain America then drives back home to California, and he sees just how much everything has changed. He goes back to his girlfriend's house to see if she's still there, and he sees a woman that he thinks is his girlfriend, but it's not. The woman ends up knocking him to the ground, and then the woman's parents come out. But that's when we find out that the mother of the girl is actually Captain America's old girlfriend, Bernie. And it's at this moment that Cap truly realizes, oh, I've been gone for a very long time. Cap and Bernie then have like a really touching heart-to-heart about how much time has passed, about how Bernie tried to wait, but she didn't want to miss her opportunity to have children. She ended up waiting for him for like 16 years. And then Cap just hugs her and says, oh, Bernie, I guess it just didn't work out for us. And this scene has real effort put into it, both by Matt Salinger, who plays Captain America, and Kim Gillingham, who plays Bernie, as well as Bernie's daughter, Sharon. That's why he confused the two. And frankly, it's probably the best scene in the movie, both from an acting perspective and a writing perspective. Everything about this scene just works. I can't really complain about it. The emotion just comes through really well. Anyway, at this point, Bernie's daughter, Sharon, takes Captain America back to her apartment to catch him up on the last 50 years of history. Unfortunately, while this is happening, the plot is really ramping up into gear, as the Red Skull's team kidnaps the president. Meanwhile, the Red Skull's daughter shows up to Bernie's house looking for Captain America and ends up murdering Sam, who was also there looking for Captain America, as well as Bernie herself. At this point, everything's just up in the air, and Cap and Sharon have to go and try to figure out where the president is. But they don't know where to look. So they go back to the lab where Captain America was made, and they find the old journal of the scientist, Dr. Vazelli. The journal then says that she has no idea who the Red Skull was before, but she heard that he was from a small town in Italy. So Cap and Sharon go to Italy, and something I find funny is that when they go to Italy, Cap tries to pull the "oh, I'm sick" card again, and he steals Sharon's car to keep her out of danger. It's really funny. Of course, Cap's efforts are ultimately shown to be a waste of time, since Sharon is able to find her way back to the plot. Anyway, they find an old radio. They then have a shootout with the Red Skull's daughter again. But eventually they manage to figure out, oh, well, this is where we need to go. Of course, as Cap and Sharon figure out where to go, Sharon pulls an Uno reverse card on Cap, and she jacks the car from Cap this time. Of course, she's immediately taken by the Red Skull and his goons, so Cap has to stage a rescue operation for her and the president. Captain America then makes his way to Fortress Lorenzo to rescue the president and Bernie. There's a cute little reunion moment between the president and Captain America as the president reveals the photo that he took of Cap the night he diverted that missile. And Cap realizes, oh my god, you were the little boy. It's just a nice little moment. Captain America then faces off against the Red Skull for their final confrontation. He then manages to use his shield to finally kill the Red Skull and the Red Skull's daughter. At this point, the president is safe, Sharon is safe, and the movie ends with like a still frame of Matt Salinger in the Captain America uniform as it fades to like a classic piece of comic book art, which I think is pretty great. But yeah, Captain America 1990, I don't think this film is that bad. Like, it has a terrible reputation, and it's lowly rated, but I don't think that this film is bad. I really don't. I mean, yeah, it's a cheap B-movie, but for a cheap B-movie, it actually puts in the effort. I already mentioned the fact that they put in the effort to establish the 1940s setting before they move into the future. But in terms of setting, a lot of the film was shot on location in Yugoslavia. And in the final act, when you see all these characters running around the ruins of, like, this old castle, a lot of it comes through because you're like, oh, wow, look at the scale of this. Like, they chose a great location to shoot, and they made sure to establish the scope of where they were. I also think that the actors do a pretty good job. I think Matt Salinger as Captain America is pretty charming. Like, not as charming as, like, Chris Evans' Captain America, but his character definitively works as a man out of time. And I also love how small actions taken by Captain America in this movie convey exactly how skilled and intelligent he is. Like, when he diverts the missile from hitting the White House, he does it by kicking the wing of the missile in a very specific way to divert the angle of it. That's on-the-spot thinking that he was able to figure out, and obviously he had the strength to do it since he just became a super soldier at that point. And also, obviously, the way he throws the shield, he always throws it in a specific way so that it could return to him. You know, it's the boomerang effect that Captain America's shield is famous for. And speaking of effects, I think the effect that they use for the shield is actually pretty great. I don't know exactly what effect it is. I suspect it's a mix between quick cut editing and stop motion. But the way he throws the shield in certain scenes, like when he takes down a watchtower in the film during his secret mission, only to have the shield returned to him, I think it looks absolutely spectacular. And moving on from that point, I also love a lot of the fight scenes in this film. There's this one sequence that takes place in the old science lab, and it's just Captain America fighting against one of the Red Skull's goons. And the way the scene is lit, it almost looks like two silhouettes fighting. Like it's just dark enough to shroud the scene in mystery, but not too dark for you not to enjoy the fight that you're watching. And I think that's actually quite an impressive feat, because you have to balance those tones very carefully. Like, legitimately, I was pretty impressed watching that. And obviously, during a lot of this scene, you have, like, the trademarked Captain America acrobatics, kicks and flips and whatever. It's fun. So yeah, Captain America in this film is pretty good. But someone in this film who I also think is underrated is Kim Gillingham, who plays both Bernie and Bernie's daughter Sharon. And something I like about her performance is the fact that because she is playing two different characters, you get to see a different dynamic with her interacting with Captain America. You have Bernie, who's like the long-lost love of Captain America. You know, she's in love with him in the 40s, and then when they meet again when she's old, she's very remorseful of all the time that's passed, but he reassures her, oh no, everything's fine, everything is fine. Like, you believe that, oh, these are two individuals that care for each other. But, you know, you then pivot over to Sharon's character, and Sharon is very much like sort of the no-nonsense, like, late 80s, early 90s tough girl. And just seeing the dynamic shift between those two actors as she pivots from one character to another, I think it's really interesting, and illustrates a certain level of talent between both actors. Overall, the acting in this film is actually pretty okay. Like, none of it is Oscar-worthy, but the actors are putting in an effort to convey emotions in the scenes that they're in. They're not just flat pieces of cardboard, they're actually trying. That being said, there are a couple instances in the film where the line reads are just overtly hilarious. Like the scene when Dr. Vaselli gets shot by that secret Nazi. Before he shoots her, he just screams, "Heil Hitler!" And the line read is just so abrupt and out of nowhere, it made me audibly laugh when I heard it. There's also, in the final battle, when Captain America's facing off against the Red Skull, and he loses his shield, and the President throws his shield back to him, Captain America, after catching his shield, just looks at the President and says,
"Mr. President, thanks."
Like, you know, just a couple unintentionally funny, like, line reads that probably could have been covered up with, like, alternate takes. But I'm glad that they weren't, because, you know, it's just something that adds a certain level of joy to this film. And speaking of joy, another thing I think in the film is actually pretty funny is the fact that after the President gets kidnapped, the Red Skull says, oh yeah, you know, we found your tracking chip in your back molar. Like, so sorry about that, it was very easy to disable.
But don't worry, next time we'll have it made in Japan.
Because obviously, as Marty McFly would say, all the best stuff is made in Japan. Anyway, this is actually a fun film to watch. Like, it is thoroughly entertaining. Like, it's hokey and colorful and comic booky. But despite these lighter elements, I think the film also does justify taking itself seriously. Like, the only explicitly fantastical element of this film is Captain America. This is a mostly grounded world that the film takes place in, and everything is treated very earnestly and sincerely, which is really refreshing, because obviously we live in an age where everyone's just been tainted by irony. So seeing something like this that does take itself seriously but is also not afraid to have fun, it's nice. And something else that did surprise me about the film is the fact that it is pretty faithful to the mythos of Captain America. Like, they do make substantial changes to the narrative. They place it more in the real world than comic book world. There's a lot of characters that they just don't include. But like I said, we all know the origin story of Captain America, and there's so many specific plot elements that are more or less accurate to the source material. Not only that, but a lot of those elements are, like, bizarrely similar to the Ultimate Avengers. For those of you who don't know, The Ultimate Avengers was an animated film that was released in 2006. The film is more or less an adaptation of the Marvel Ultimate series from Brian Hitch and Mark Millar that was running in the early 2000s. And interestingly enough, Ultimate Avengers is actually the first feature adaptation of the Avengers. The film was released direct-to-video, and it was part of this deal that Marvel made with Lionsgate to make a series of animated films. And this deal actually did come out with a lot of really good animated films, like Hulk vs. Next Avengers Heroes of Tomorrow, and of course Planet Hulk, which is amazing. I actually have all 8 of those animated films, like, right here. They're really good, and I'd recommend seeing them. But watching Captain America 1990, a lot of the elements of this film reminded me of Captain America's story in Ultimate Avengers, so I actually rewatched Ultimate Avengers after I watched this to see what was the same. And obviously, like I've said before, there are several elements of the Captain America mythos that just have to stay the same. He fights a Nazi with a fucked up face, he sacrifices himself, disabling a rocket that's being aimed at America, and he gets frozen for decades. But there's other elements of the film that are really bizarrely similar to this. Like Like the fact that when Captain America is being flown to the Nazi castle for his secret mission, he's wearing like pilot-style gear. Or the fact that when he wakes up, he goes to see his old girlfriend who actually has moved on. Or the fact that when he's walking through the modern world, he comes across a punk couple randomly. And everything else you could hand wave away, but that specifically, the fact that Captain America comes across a punk couple, like a punk rock couple, in both films, it's so oddly specific. And that really cannot be a coincidence. So that's just something odd that I noticed. It's also worth noting, I feel, the fact that Ultimate Avengers, in a lot of ways, feels almost like a proto-version of the live-action Avengers. Because obviously you have Nick Fury reporting to the World Security Council, forming the Avengers team as a last resort, and the fact that the villains in this animated film are actually the Chitauri. And obviously a lot of that is due to the fact that a good portion of the MCU is built off the foundation of Marvel Ultimates, including the Black Nick Fury. But still, I think it's interesting nonetheless that you could kind of draw a through line starting with Captain America 1990, then moving to Ultimate Avengers, and then finally the Avengers. Look, all I'm saying is that the MCU would not exist without this movie, and this movie deserves more gratitude than it gets. Still though, as much as I do like Captain America 1990, it is not a flawless film. As I said, the film is essentially a B-movie, and while I don't think it does anything particularly wrong, I do think it misses out on doing certain things that could help flesh out the narrative, or just add weight to events. This stems primarily from moments that you'd expect the characters to react to, but they don't. Like, for instance, when Bernie dies, obviously her daughter Sharon reacts terribly to her mother's death. But we don't actually get a reaction shot from Captain America at all. And this is absolutely something he would be upset and broken up over. But we don't get to see what his reaction is. There's also the fact that General Fleming was actually working with the Red Skull and his cartel the whole time. And when the president finds out, all he does is punch General Fleming. And we don't hear at all about what happens to the general afterwards. Not even a reference to him like going to jail or something. It feels like amidst like other emotional moments that happen in this film, that these moments would seem intuitive to include, and the film doesn't. I also do have an issue with the Captain America costume. I've already referenced the fact that the eyes are too far apart on the mask. But in certain scenes, you look at the mask, and it's very clear that the ears coming out of the mask are part of the mask, like they're rubber. It's very distracting. But then in other scenes, there's actual ear holes cut through the mask, and you can see Matt Salinger's actual ears. And it just makes me wonder why they did that scene to scene. I suspect what happened is that the mask was probably cutting into his ears when he was wearing it. So they made a second version with ears attached. That way, the only time we'd have to see his real ears is when he was like taking off the mask or something. But it's very distracting. I like the costume itself. Like, it's fake and rubbery and obviously sticks out like a sore thumb in this film. But it's accurate to the actual look of Captain America. And the costume itself looks like a better version of like a homemade cosplay made for a convention. So I can give it a pass. It's just the ears and the eyes being too wide apart. Those things don't work for me. And I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know. But yeah, putting those things aside, I like this movie. Like, obviously I'm biased because I love Captain America so much. But I really don't think that this film is that bad. It's hokey, it's silly, but it's also earnest and sincere. And while we've obviously gotten much better Captain America films in the modern era, I think it is worth looking back at this film just to remind us where the roots of these things were, and saying, well, this one helped set the groundwork for a lot of things that came later. Like, for what it's worth, watching this movie did actually remind me why I love Captain America so much. Because despite being a man out of time who has lost everything, he's still fighting to do the right thing. In a lot of ways, that truly is the essence of the American spirit. And that is a standard that we should all try to hold ourselves to. But yeah, that was my review of Captain America 1990. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. And I will see you later.